Hey guys, Michael from Eibach here, and today we'll be installing our Stage 2 Pro Truck Lift System on this Bronco. So we're going to go ahead and get started on the install. First, we're going to start by removing the axle nut. We're going to loosen the nut for the upper control arm. We got our tie rod that we have to loosen, and then we can go ahead and get the sway bar mount off, or the sway bar link off, as well as the bottom nuts for the lower shock mount. The axle nut takes a 35mm socket. We do this to prevent pulling out the axle on these. They're pretty sensitive, so just a little bit will cause the CVs to come apart. So it's just an extra precaution to take so that doesn't happen. So we're going to go ahead and remove the nut on the tie rod, which is a 21mm socket. So we're going to go ahead and remove the end link nut here, which is also a 21mm. We're going to go ahead and take off the nut that holds on the upper control arm to the knuckle, which is an 18mm socket. You'll notice that I'll back it out and then not take it off the whole way. We're going to go ahead and put it on just a little bit, and when we break loose the knuckle from the upper control arm, that'll keep it from falling apart. So in order to break loose the knuckle from the upper control arm, we take 2 hammers. The first hammer pretty much takes the blow of the second hammer, so we're not directly hitting the knuckle. Now we're going to jump down to the bottom, and we're going to get the 2 nuts off the lower shock mount. So we use the air hammer to help push the CV out since it's seated pretty tight in the knuckle. So as you can see, we push the axle out of the way, and that way we're not pulling on the CVs. We're going to go ahead and break loose the tie rod from the knuckle. So now that we got the tie rod out of the way, we can go ahead and remove the upper control arm. Then just make sure you maintain control of the knuckle so we can swing it out of the way, and then make sure we don't pull that CV joint apart. So it's always best practice to kind of use some sort of strap to tie up the knuckle so it's not falling on or hanging its weight on the CV joints. So now that we got everything else loose, we're going to go ahead and jump to the top hat bolts here, and then we're just going to use a ratcheting 15mm and then go ahead and take them off. You have a few different options for removing the strut. An easy way is to take the 2 lower control arm bolts out on the frame side. There is a risk for doing this. We have seen that some of the bolts, specifically the passenger side front bolt, have some bad threads. So when you start taking the nut off and feel any resistance, you'll end up cutting the bolt off, and then you'll have to get a factory replacement. Another method, which we use often here, is taking the air hammer and pressing out the studs with the air hammer, and then that makes the strut easy to remove. And as you've seen today, we chose to use a pry bar. However, you may need a little helping hand to help push the lower control arm down far enough to get the studs out and the strut out of the vehicle. And now we're gonna go back in the opposite way we came out. So for the top hat, we supply 3 bolts with a lock washer. Make sure the lock washer stays on there. And then we're just gonna line it up. And then for each of the front coilovers, we include a hardware kit. So we got 2 washers, nut, and a bolt. Keep 1 washer on the top side, and the other washer is going to go on the nut side. So this is going back on with a 19mm socket and a 19mm wrench up top. The supplied bolts are a 17mm. We'll go ahead and use our 17mm ratcheting wrench. Next, we're going to go ahead and get the upper control arm back into the knuckle. So we'll go ahead and remove our strap. Set that to the side for now. Carefully get our knuckle back into position here. And with the aid of a pry bar, Almost the 8 of a pry bar. We can easily get our A-arm back into the knuckle. All right, we can go ahead and snug back up our knuckle. Go ahead and snug this back up. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and retighten the axle nut. Just make sure it seats all the way. And then we'll go ahead and torque everything to factory spec, and then we'll jump on the other side and repeat the process. All right, so now we're at the rear. It's a little bit more simple, and it starts with getting this fender liner out of the way. So once we remove all of these clips, there's a couple small bolts, and then a couple plastic nuts right here. Ratcheting a wrench makes your life a lot easier. Now we have access to get to all the top hat nuts as well as the lower mount bolts. So we're gonna go up on the lift so we can more easily get to it and put a pull jack under the axle. We're gonna go ahead and support this side of the axle. That way we can get this lower bolt out, and then we'll go up top and get the top hat. So on the head side of the bolt is a 27 and the nut is a 30 millimeter. So we're gonna remove the top hat nuts with a 15 millimeter wrench. Again, a ratcheting wrench makes your life a lot easier with the limited room to work up top. Be a good idea to leave one of the nuts slightly on at the top to capture it. Now we can come straight out. I'm just gonna get it a little more snugged up to get the top hat a little closer to it. This has a self-locking tab, so you don't really need the wrench. Now we can pop the fender liner back in. And just be careful putting these back in. They are plastic and will strip pretty easy. And that concludes the installation on our Stage 2 Pro Truck Lift System for this Bronco. We're gonna go ahead and throw the wheels and tires back on it, align it, drive it, and we're good to go. And for more information on our Bronco products, visit eibach.com.